Spotlighting Hawaii's leaders.
We want to bring in Governor David E.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor.
Lieutenant Governor, good morning. Thanks so much for joining us. Mayor Derek Kawakami.
Thank you so much, Senator, for being here.
Spotlighting the issues.
Where is the virus right now in our community?
How much is this overall going to cost the state?
How are you responding to the community's concerns? Talk about the level of citations that you guys are writing.
Spotlight Hawaii with Yanji Denise and Ryan Kalei-Suji on the digital platforms of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser.
Well, happy Aloha Friday. Thanks so much for tuning in this morning. I'm Ryan Kalei-Suji, joined by Yanji Denise, and this is Spotlight Hawaii. Of course, there is so much news that's happening here locally, but a lot of news that's actually happening nationally that will impact residents right here in Hawaii. And today we're going to speak to somebody who's working directly on working for the people of Hawaii all the way in Washington, D.C.
That's right. We're joined live from the Capitol with Congressman Ed Case. He's joining us from his office in Washington this morning. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be with you. Good afternoon. Aloha. Capitol Hill right here.
I want to talk to you. You know, you've spoken with us on this show throughout the pandemic, and early on, you talked a lot about the kinds of calls your office was getting, calls for help, but specifically a lot about PPP, getting funding for local businesses. How has the nature of the calls for assistance that you're getting, how has that changed, and what does that tell you about the needs here in the islands?
Well, we are seeing a reduced overall number of calls having to do with COVID-19 assistance. I think that is twofold. First of all, I think the federal assistance, which is, coming up to somewhere in the range of 20 billion or so to Hawaii overall or more at this point, actually did work, did stabilize people and businesses as much as possible during that very terrible, the heat of the pandemic. But also, the economy is coming back, and so I think there's just a little bit more of a groove to things. We definitely still have calls. There's a lot of questions. For example, unemployment insurance right straight through was the very top concern of folks that were calling my office, which was frustrating because I'm not in charge of unemployment insurance, so that's a state issue. I could help them, and that is still a top issue. But we're starting to see a tapering off of of questions whether somebody got their direct payment or some other assistance. We're starting to see some related kinds of assistance requests. For example, we are starting to see people that were backed up in terms of processing passports or immigration or wanting to bring their families here. Those things are picking up again, but the direct COVID-19 related calls to my office are down by about half this year, in the first half of this year. Of course, they're still up by a half over a year before that, so there's still a lot of need out there.
One of the concerns, of course, that was spoken about yesterday by the governor is regarding the evictions moratorium that the governor will be lifting in just a few weeks here. And there is that concern of a potential wave of people that will be losing their ability to pay rent and being forced to evict. The state announced a program that will help in that transition. Wanted to get your thoughts on what this is, if this is a concern and something that you folks are working on a national level.
Well, it absolutely is a concern. It's a very difficult situation. I mean, we've had an eviction moratorium in place at the federal and the state level for 16, 17 months now. And I think that was necessary. I think it was necessary not to kick people out of their homes if they couldn't pay their rent. I think that was the right policy call by both the federal government and the state. We did try to compensate landlords with assistance to landlords, whether it be PPP assistance or direct landlord related assistance. We tried to compensate renters, for that matter, who, if they could pay, should be paying to their landlords. And so, we tried to get ourselves through again the economic consequences of COVID-19 to a place where we can start to pick up the economy again. But you simply can't continue a full-on eviction moratorium forever. And so the question really from a policy perspective is, well, okay, are enough people stabilized so that you can actually reinstate the normal rules, but have a good enough safety net that you will be able to help and still, catch folks that are just not back to where they need to be. And at some point, you need to make the call that it's time to dip back in that direction. And I think this probably is about the right time to do that. I think it's important to note also that although sometimes people think that landlords are all big corporations that can absorb these kinds losses of income. That's actually not the case. Many, if not most, are small businesses or families, and they have foregone their own income as they had their own mortgage obligations. So this is a chain that that has to be unwound at some point, and I think we've got to go back in that direction. But we definitely need to make sure those safety nets are in place. The federal government has certainly helped with the aid that we have sent to the state and the county governments, and as we know, both the state and the county governments have, with that aid, set up their own assistance programs to take care of those that are particularly impacted. But yes, it is going to be a difficult time as we readjust.
It's sort of peak season for you, if you will, there in Washington, Appropriations Week. Tell us about some of the work that you're doing right now and what Hawaii can expect to gain in fiscal year 2022.
Well, I'm of course on the Appropriations Committee. That is the committee in Congress. It's actually the oldest committee in Congress, going back to the very early years of Congress. And we are responsible for allocating federal funding for the year. So it's a very influential and wide-reaching committee. And every year we have to produce the federal spending for the upcoming fiscal year. We do that in 12 separate bills, ranging from defense to justice, to housing, to transportation, to foreign affairs, and everywhere in between. And we have been here in Washington this week, although the full House is not in session. The Appropriations Committee has been meeting every day, all day, to crunch through those bills. And we just finished the last bill just about half an hour ago, as a matter of fact. So it's been a full week for me here. I've certainly been trying to pursue not only programs that are of benefit to our country and make the right decisions there, but of specific benefit to Hawaii across the board. One area, for example, would be in defense. Of course, our defense presence in Hawaii is not only something that I think we owe to our country, but it is our second economic generator. And in fact, for the last year and a half, it's been our number one economic generator. To consider a Hawaii that had both tourism go down without the backstop of defense is to consider far more of a disaster than we saw. And so from that perspective, I've been involved, for example, in trying to maintain funding to improve Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard, our largest industrial employer, which is a key economic driver for our Hawaii. Other areas would include, Native Hawaiian education, Native Hawaiian healthcare, certainly our business communities, help to tourism, transportation and the infrastructure, our ports, our harbors. It's really been a week in which I not only took a broad range of views across the entire federal government, but how could I get the federal government through the appropriations process to attend to Hawaii's specific needs, both specific to Hawaii, but also to the Indo-Pacific?
Sorry about that. Yanji's usually the one that doesn't unmute herself. I unfortunately did that today. We got one a show. One of the areas, of course, that continues to struggle is the restaurant industry here in Hawaii. Although there have been some changes on the city and county level here in Honolulu that do allow for restaurants to open to full capacity with vaccination verifications and possible negative testing, many restaurants choosing not to do that just because of the staff that it requires and just the protocols. So many continue to stay with what the state has mandated for those restaurants. And we're hearing a lot of those businesses continue to struggle with employment as well as just staying in business. We saw a number of longtime restaurants close their doors. We know that you are also working in this area as well. If you can update us on some of the things that are happening in that area.
Well, of course, the entire tourism industry was the most severely impacted industry in the entire country, in fact, the entire world, because of COVID-19 for obvious reasons. And when we think of tourism, we forget sometimes that that's not just hotels. That's not just the activities around hotels. That's everything that happens around tourism. That is our restaurants. Our restaurants rely primarily on our visitors. Of course, when we have local residents that are sitting home, that doesn't help things either. But also our entertainment venues. There are just our wedding operators. There's a host of folks that relate one way or the other to the visitor industry. And in the beginning of COVID, for the first year plus, we were focused primarily on general assistance, federal assistance to all small businesses, regardless of whether you are a restaurant or a steel mill or whatever it was. and trying to help folks out through a variety of programs. But it became evident that there were particular industries that were particularly hard hit. Airlines would be an example, and restaurants was a definite example. And so in the American Rescue Plan that we passed earlier this year, we set up what we referred to as the Restaurant Revitalization Fund, which was targeted assistance to our restaurants, of which, as you've already noted, Hawaii restaurants were particularly hard hit. And we set that up at about $28 billion, and we put it out there, and there was tremendous, the system was overwhelmed right away. To the point that roughly, I forget what the figure was, but just hundreds of thousands of applications, of which about half were actually funded before that program ran out of money. The same thing happened in Hawaii, where we had about 2,000 restaurants that applied. Only about 1,000 received assistance. And so it was clear that we needed to plus up that program. I'm part of an effort by a lot of the folks across the country who have a similar situation to add another $60 billion to that Restaurant Revitalization Fund, which is actually the shortfall that we're facing right now in estimated demand on that program. So we're trying very hard to get more aid to our restaurants.
I want to ask you, I know that it's not necessarily in the federal purview to set this policy, but, Governor David Ige is holding fast to his benchmark of 70% fully vaccinated. He's counting the entire population. That includes children under 12 who cannot access the vaccine to get to that 70%. There's been some pushback here locally against that. But, even in the comments right now, there are some people who are saying the cases are going up. We're not doing well. So there are a lot of concerns. What are your thoughts on the indoor mask mandate here in the islands? Do you agree with the governor for holding fast to that 70%?
Yes, I do agree with the governor. I think that the governor from the beginning of COVID-19 has placed the public health advice, the public health goals, the public health mandates first and foremost. And that is unlike many other parts of this country, in which, people started to, feel that somehow they could, beat COVID-19 without those kinds of protections. And somehow if we just, revitalize the economy without those protections, it would take care of COVID-19. And that was proved dead wrong. In fact, I think if you look back at our history in Hawaii, one would have to conclude that when we actually did relax our mandates in the summer of 2020, when everybody else was saying, "Oh, this is over," and we let our guard down, and we got nailed because of that. And so, and that was a decision that I think was perhaps not putting the strict public health side of it first, and trying to get back to a normal life. And COVID doesn't allow you to do that. It is a non-discriminatory disease. It is, as we know, very adjustable. We have variants out there right now, and you cannot relax your guard on it. And so I don't really care if the rest of the country, feels that somehow we're being too protective. I frankly think the rest of the country has let their guard down too soon, and we are seeing that now because we are seeing a resurgence of COVID-19 across a great part of our country, including parts that are nowhere near, our vaccination level, which is the second best in the country. But even second best in the country, if you're not vaccinated from COVID-19, you're at total risk when you start to open up again. And that's what we see happening right now with triple digits in the last week. And so I think the governor is being cautious, and I think cautious is what you have to do.
Another concern that we're seeing here locally is just the blending of visitors that are coming to the islands. We're seeing those record numbers continue to come in week after week as more visitors look to make their vacation plans and destination Hawaii because of the limitations of travel, both domestically and abroad. And so many people coming to the islands, and there seems to be this tension between local residents as well as visitors, and just the capacity issue of how much our state can really accommodate all these people that are flying into the islands. I wanted to get your thoughts on where we're at right now. Do you think that this is something that the state needs to consider, and what other ways and mechanisms can the state use to control the amount of visitors that are coming into the islands?
I absolutely do think we have to consider this. This was building to a breaking point before COVID-19. When we got to 10 million visitors a year and went past 10 million visitors a year, when we started to just see visitors in every single aspect of our lives, as opposed to being able to go back to our homes and kind of have a home life without an illegal vacation rental next door, and without a bunch of tour helicopters flying overhead disturbing our peace of our neighborhood, and when we couldn't get into our beaches, to our trails, when we had litter throughout Hawaii, when the level of tourism got to a point. See, tourism in Hawaii, which has had a long and storied history, as we all know, has always depended on one thing, and that is the acceptance of residents, because people don't come to Hawaii just for our beauty. They come because they feel comfortable, they feel welcome, they feel that this is a safe place. And when you start to lose the support of the residents themselves, that gets around, and pretty soon visitors say, well, that's not a friendly place to go. Why should I go there? And so we have to be very, very realistic about this. What happened during COVID-19 was that a terrible pandemic gave us a glimpse of a Hawaii without tourism, and we all liked it. And so we're reluctant to go back to a world in which we have 10 million plus tourists, where we have illegal vacation rentals, where we're facing all of these consequences. And so I think this is a very, very real discussion that we have to have, that maybe a sea change in a 3-generation now march towards highest volume tourism possible. And I think we got to have that discussion. Now, sometimes I hear people wring their hands at the state and county level and say, woe is us, we can't do anything about this. People get to come here if they want. Well, yes, it's true that people can constitutionally, for the most part, fly to Hawaii if they want. But if you've got half of your hotel rooms or dwelling units that are illegal vacation rentals, and you haven't cracked down on your illegal vacation rental laws, well, then that's a no-brainer about how to go after this. Because if you dry that up, then you will have higher hotel prices, but that will have the effect of lower visitors. And this may seem like treason to some people, but I think this is the reality. You don't have to build another set of gates at the airport and increase airplane capacity. You don't have to, you can impose reasonable resident versus non-resident user fees at all of our attractions. So we have tools in our toolkits that in the state, you don't have to zone, new hotels. You don't have to make it so easy to renovate old hotels to much higher density and room purposes. So there are things that we can do, and this is a discussion we need to have, because to go back to the, as us lawyers say this, the status quo ante before COVID-19, I don't think is going to result in a good, solid tourism industry for us going forward. We're going to have the kind of open revolts we've started to see against tourism.
We've been talking a lot this week in the news about possible candidates for the governor's office, and your name has been floated as someone who might run. Wanted to get your thoughts on if that's an office that you would consider looking at. Is that something that you're exploring right now?
Well, on one level, yes, of course it's tempting, because there are many, many challenges that Hawaii faces that really cannot be solved at the federal level. I can help, but the state and county government levels are where those decisions are made. And sure, I think about taking a shot at helping my state at that level. But I think my best utility for Hawaii, where I can most help Hawaii, given my my experience and my seniority and my time in Washington, especially as our delegation goes through some transition with Congressman Kahele coming on, although he's doing incredible in terms of his first 6 months. I just think my best utility for Hawaii is here. And so, I have filed my papers for re-election the next time around. And I guess I'm at the point in my life when I never say absolutely not, because I've said absolutely not before, and then it hasn't worked out that way. But that's what I'm doing. I'm not a candidate for governor. I'm not trying to be the governor. I'm certainly interested in it. And I certainly hope that the candidates that step forward for governor are candidates that I think can lead a change in Hawaii that is needed at the state and the local level.
On the federal level, we know that there are really these, expansions of programs that are being available for families, most specifically, with some of those new aid that is being made available to those who have children with tax credits and such. If you can spend some time diving a little deeper into those programs and what people from Hawaii can expect to be receiving through those types of federal supports and programs that are currently being distributed throughout the country.
Okay. Well, I think you're referring to the child tax credit. Under our federal tax laws, we provide many people throughout the country that have minor children with a tax credit to help them to raise those children. That tax credit depends a little bit on what your income is. Above a certain income, you're not eligible for the credit, but most people are eligible for the credit. It's up to $2,000 per child, minor child. It was. In the emergency assistance that we passed to respond to COVID-19, we increased that child tax credit to $3,600 max per child. This was for the current tax year, and we did that because we wanted to help families throughout the country. Families were struggling, and that was another way for us to be able to help families that needed help, especially families with children, especially families like so many in Hawaii who have to work two jobs in order to support themselves and their families, and have to pay for things like child care, which, as we all know, is cripplingly expensive in Hawaii. And so we increased it to 3,600, but we also did something else which hadn't been done before, and that is that we allowed for half of that credit to be advanced to people in a monthly payment. It used to be you had to kind of wait for the tax year to be over, and then you did a look back, got your credit at tax time. Now we're advancing half of that. That just started yesterday, and I think that was warranted. I think that will help folks. And so if you think that you are in that category of folks that are eligible for that, and you have any questions whatsoever about whether you're getting it, it should come as a direct payment if you have paid your taxes in past years. If you're not kind of on record with the IRS already, then it's a little bit like the direct payments. We went through this long effort to make sure that we got payments to people in various ways, from direct deposit to bank accounts to checks, to sometimes it was a lot more complicated if people were not filing tax returns or whatever. But if you have any questions about this, that's one area that my office can definitely help with.
There are some who are saying that this should be made permanent, that this, it's just for this tax year. But do you think that this should be made permanent? And also, there are some concerns that people who, as you mentioned, perhaps don't file taxes, really the families who perhaps need this money the most, will not be able to access it. What can be done to make sure that the neediest families get this? And then part two, should this continue beyond this year?
Well, certainly, like any program like this, when the federal government changes a program or updates a program, education is everything. And the effort is to send out to as many people as possible, to everybody, exactly what we've done and why we've done it. And I am absolutely sure that we're going to go through a period of months in which there are going to be many, many questions about this. The fact of the matter is that the folks that need it most are often the folks that are least connected with government. And so that's on my shoulders and my colleagues here and my federal government, is to pursue every effort we can to educate people on the availability of this program, which was really no different than many of the programs that we had to roll out on an emergency basis over the last 17 months of COVID-19. So we're right in the middle of that right now. Just to make this point, there are people that legally don't file their tax returns. They don't have to file their tax returns, and so the question is, how do we? Because they don't have the income that requires a tax return to be filed, and so these are folks that many times are the ones that we need to reach the most. So there are many organizations out there that are trying to get the information out. Our nonprofits are being very, very good about this to many of our communities. But it's, like I said, it's going to be a lift to get that word out. Nobody's going to lose out if they are eligible for it. They're not going to lose out if it takes a little bit of time to get the word. But the money is available right now if people are eligible, and it's needed out there. As to whether to make it permanent, that's part of a much broader question that we are facing in Congress right now, because we have in fact sent out somewhere in the range of $5 trillion of emergency assistance in the last 17 months. All of that needed, I believe, all of it borrowed. So we together with the fact that it was needed and we did borrow it, we worsened our federal budget about as severely as ever since the Second World War. And that has to be a consideration. We have several programs that were temporary emergency programs that people now want to be continued. And of course, some of them probably should be continued. But from my perspective, the question that I have to ask is, well, what are the priorities to continue them? And then how do we pay for those? How do we not worsen our federal budget even more so? To extend the current increase in the child tax credit, 10 years would cost somewhere in the range of $600 billion. So if you take that against a normal federal budget of $1.5 trillion, which is what my Appropriations Committee has just been doing this week, that is a lot of borrowing and or money and or increased taxes or reduced revenues in order to pay for that. So it's not an easy policy choice. It may be the right thing to do, but there are trade-offs all over the place that we're having to deal with right now.
Our time is almost coming up to an end here. We thank you for spending this morning with us, but wanted to provide you a final opportunity. Any final message for the constituents and your constituents here in Hawaii, and a message that you may have for local residents as we head into this weekend?
Well, I think the first thing, obviously, is everybody knows this. We're not out of COVID-19, not by a long shot. It's going to be with us. I will state very frontally that I believe that vaccinations are the way forward. We know that 98% of the people that are getting sick in Hawaii right now are unvaccinated and are getting sick from other people that are not unvaccinated, but there are people that are vaccinated that are being exposed and getting sick. So I think this is where we need to go. We need to keep up the good work that we've already done. That is still our answer in the midterm, at least. So that's the first thing I would say. And the second thing I would say is that again, as it has been for 17 months of a terrible crisis, my office is completely open to anybody that does have any questions. I don't care whether it's I don't care whether there aren't any stupid questions. I mean, people say that, but I promise there are no stupid questions. We want to help. We're here to help, and the best way into my office is case.house.gov. Case.house.gov.
Congressman Ed Case joining us from his office at the Capitol in Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for being here this morning. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Aloha.
Aloha. Well, we covered a broad range of topics there, Ryan. Thought it was interesting to get his thoughts. He said never say never on running for governor, but right now he's filed papers for re-election for his current seat. Not completely ruling it out, but probably not for now.
Yeah, saying he's not a candidate, but really focused on what he's doing right now, and also agreeing with the current governor, of course, Governor David Ige's benchmark of that 70%, saying that the state has done a good job of setting that benchmark and making sure that we are heading towards that direction rather than moving the goalpost of where we need to be, saying that he believes that getting everyone vaccinated to that degree is important and not lifting those mask mandates that he said, he's seeing throughout the country. And of course, we know that many states are now actually going to be re-implementing some of those things that they have, some of those restrictions that they have loosened up. So he agrees also with Governor Ige and where we're at with that 70% benchmark.
That's right. And you heard him talk about the benefits that are being extended to families with children under the age of 17, that tax credit going from $2,000 to $3,600. Those direct payments started going out yesterday. So make sure if you are a tax filer that you check to see if you've gotten a payment. Of course, it can take the federal government a little while. So if you didn't get it yesterday, doesn't mean you're not going to get it. But he did say that his office is open to take calls from families to try to assist to bridge that gap. But in case you think that you're eligible for that money and you haven't received it, make sure to definitely check out case.house.gov. He also talked about restaurants, Ryan, and that's a topic that we'll be exploring in more detail on Monday.
That's right. We're going to be talking with those who help to lead that industry to get their take on what's happening with some of the restaurants here in Hawaii, the changes that they've had to make, we know that this is an industry that has had to adapt through the various tiers of the tier system, as well as accommodating these large requests that are coming in for people who want to dine in and have that experience. Once again, we're seeing these reservations that book up a month before its date. And so a lot of people really wanting to get back out there, but because of the limitations of capacity, as well as just the overall demand on the workers, we know that this is an industry that continues to struggle. We're going to hear from them on Monday.
That's right. We'll be joined by the head of the Restaurant Association along with the head of the Hawaii Retailers Association, because retail faces a lot of the same challenges as the restaurants. So we'll be speaking with those folks on Monday. Then on Wednesday, we'll be talking to the head of the Department of Labor and Industrial Relations. If you're still receiving unemployment benefits, if you're recently separated from a job, or if you have just questions about that program, please do join us then. Anne Pereira-Eustaquio is fantastic at answering all those kinds of questions. So she'll be here on Wednesday. And then on Friday, an always popular guest, Lieutenant Governor Josh Green. So a full week ahead.
Yeah, looking forward to all those conversations. We thank you for being a part of today's conversation, and thank you to Congressman Ed Case for being here as well. Have a great weekend. We'll see you right back here on Monday. Aloha.
Aloha.